right, well, thank you very much. Let's begin with this question. How many of you are going to go to the group social tonight? Please raise your hand. Very good. I'm glad to hear that you're going to be there. And the second question is, tell me, what is a pirate's favorite letter of the alphabet? So on the count of three, yell it out. 1, 2, 3. R. You know, most people think that the favorite letter that pirates love the R, but actually more than that, they love the C. All right, well, welcome to the course today. It's great to have you here. As you know, we're being live streamed, so be on your best behavior. But more importantly than that, if you want to ask a question or respond to a question, raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. Because no matter how good your voice is, no matter how well we can hear you in this room, you won't be picked up for the live feed. All right, so welcome also to all those who were watching out in live feed land. Let's get into the course content. I want to ask a general question, and we'll get a mic to you. The question is, what is important to you? Raise your hand, we'll get a mic to you. What is important to you? Way up here. Yeah, go ahead and wait. We'll get the mic to you.
For me is to be efficient. Well, for my court to be efficient and effective in doing whatever it needs to be done for the public, the defendants, and inside of my court.
Very good. Thank you so much for letting us know that, Lizzie. Somebody else, what's important to you? The question is, am I asking fiscally related or in general? And it could be either. It could be general. Yes.
Securing resources, financial resources that aren't provided in our baseline budget.
All right. Very good. Thank you, Michelle, for that. You want to mention something? We'll get the mic right. What's that? All right. So the response there is being a steward of the county's money. So I want to relay two important truths to you. The first is something that you should know, but you might not, and that is you do important work. You are part of a branch of government, part of the judicial branch. You make our society safer. You help people to rearrange their lives. You allow families the joy of an adoption, and etc. So no matter what your role is, it's important. All of you do important work. And the second truth is you need some financial skills in order to do the important work that you do. And so that's why you're here today. Now, NACM has come up with some great content. That great content is assembled in the core. There are 13 core competencies. This is one of them. I think it's one of the most important because almost anything that a court does involves finances. It takes money to do what we do. This is what the competency looks like. When you see, you're not expected to read the fine print, of course, but when you see the title of that, Budget and Fiscal Management, what do you think about? We'll get a mic to you if you have a reply to that. What do you think about when you see that title?
I'm coming.
Not only securing existing funds and dealing with your current budget, but also seeking out additional resources.
Yeah, exactly.
And then managing it all appropriately. So if I come from the grant world. So if it's a grant funded project, managing that project well enough to assert ourselves as a viable future recipient of more grants. So it's kind of future focused too.
Great, thank you. That's a great summary. Anybody else? What does the title make you think about?
Money.
Money. Money, 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 yeah. And of course, a lot of this course is about money. We're going to talk about managing that money. Yes?
My audit.
Your audit. How many of you love the word audit? Or the phrase, the auditors are coming to see us? Right? Okay, well, thank you for that. And next question is, what do you want to know about budget and fiscal management?
Mostly how to spend it well.
How to spend it well. Very good. Thank you so much for that. Anybody else, something you want to know about budget and fiscal management?
I'd like to talk about forecasting.
Forecasting, okay? We're going to talk about forecasting of revenues and expenditures before we're finished. One more. Anything that you want to know about budget and fiscal management? Okay. Oh, we got a hand here.
Meaningful key performance indicators for our programs.
All right, very good. Performance indicators. Those can be tough, can't they? And coming up with meaningful ones. I'd be glad to talk to you afterward if you have specific programs and you'd like to talk about what some performance measures might be for those. Okay?
Okay. So, as you just saw, that was a curriculum. We have 13 of those on the CORE website. So everyone, I encourage you to go to the nacomcore.org. It's a revamped website. It's incredible. It has a wealth of information. So you'll have the full curriculum. Today, we're just touching on budgeting. We're not even getting into internal controls or your accounts receivable and accounts payable and all of that. There's not enough time. But there's so many resources that I want you to be aware that are out there. It can be the NACM curriculum. It could be some NACM past courses and things like that that you'll find on the NACM website. But also look into ICM. Look into Governmental Financial Officers Association. Many state associations have done different things. They've partnered with local universities to provide Governmental Accounting 101, which is just a taste. You do not have to do everything, but as a court manager, you should be familiar with it and be able to speak the language with the auditors or whomever else you're speaking with. So this will just be a little bit of a taste, and it's mostly budgeting, but the rest of it is all in that curriculum, so please take a look at it. So today, what we want you to do is get familiar with the whole competency. But the overall theme is we're here as stewards of the public's dollars. So how are we using it in the best possible way? What do we need to show? And how can we do that? And we're going to learn from each other as we're answering questions, going back to performance measurements and things like that, that you need to put into your budget nowadays, because you have to prove that you deserve that money and you should continue to get the money, and why it's so important to be able to enhance the court system and not just the same routine items all the time. There's some skills to fiscal management. You don't need to be an expert in all of it, but you can learn different things. You don't need to know how to do that journal entry, but you need to understand what happens if it doesn't get done and what are your consequences. So the budget, it's just a tool. It's just a management tool. It's something to just put out there and figure out what the budget should show the priorities of the court. If we don't budget those priorities, we will never achieve those goals. So what you need to do is go through and figure out what are the goals and objectives of the court. Does your court have a strategic plan? Have you designed a mission and vision, and have you even looked at it in the last 10 years? Who's going to make those decisions? Start thinking about all of that, jotting it all down, and as we go through the process, you'll know. Obviously, your revenues need to match your expenditures. Many times that doesn't work, but finding ways to figure out how you're going to handle everything, and also figure out where you want to be. If you want to be the premier court 10 years, 5 years from now, what's it going to take? And every year you're budgeting a little bit more, a little bit more.
A budget is necessary for the reasons that you see on the slide. First of all, it provides a tool for fiscal control. It gives you guidelines in which you should collect the revenues, and one thing that is more important to us is what are our guidelines regarding expenditures. And without a budget, you don't know that. I would suggest that each of you have a written budget at home. It makes a big difference to plan what you're going to spend and to stay within those spending guidelines. Secondly, it shares important information. Someone can look at the budget document and tell what your cost centers are, the things that you want to accomplish, and what you're all about. Next, it highlights your purpose and role. A budget is more than just numbers. A budget often has narrative with it, and it can explain what your purpose and role are. In fact, your funding authority may require you to do that each year. And then it gives a clear statement for projecting and then for actually operating within it, how those public monies will be used. When it's down on paper, you know what is included, you know what you're allowed to spend and therefore not expend, and it gives you something to stay within those guidelines. And so when drafting the budget, all of these things are important. The people in this room would be funded a variety of different ways. Ask yourself, who gives you your funding? Is it the state? Is it the state and the county? Is it the county only? Is it the city? You should know who your funding sources are, and you may have to work with more entities than just one. There are some circuits here in Florida that have 7 different counties. And so those court administrators, that court administrator would have to work with 7 different county commissions and the state legislature. And so you need to know who those funding authorities are, who gives funding to you. You also need to know what your spending restrictions are. If you have spending restrictions in the management of your budget, please raise your hand. Very, very common. How about, do you have, even though you have a budget, do you need to ask for permission before you spend it? Raise your hand. Okay, and you need to know those kinds of things when drafting and with operating within a budget.
Okay, so these are the types of budget. You're probably very familiar with the operational budget. It's the operations of your court. What's involved? Is it staff, the supplies, the mail machine, your security, whatever it may be. A project budget, think grant budget. That's going to be a special department, a special item that you might have, a specialty court. And then capital budgets are going to be when you're increasing the tangible assets of that court. It could be a renovation, a major renovation. It could be a new courthouse, a huge IT project over a certain amount, a large dollar amount. And Mark's going to go into a little more detail, but these are just 3 of the different types that we're going to highlight today for you. And what you need to think about is figure out, do you even know how you're budgeting or how the municipality's budgeting for you, so that you can start matching your goals and objectives to it, but also you got to go back to the data. You need to be able to measure everything that you're doing in your budget. So how are you going to do it? It's going to come into play with all of this.
So the operational budget is not project specific. It's not meant to detail the revenues and the expenditures related to a specific project. It deals with general operations. You know, it may have several funds or cost centers within that operational budget. For example, judges and judicial assistants, or court administration, or case management. But it deals with the day-to-day operations of the court. And you'll see the type of some of the expenditures that you would expect to have within that budget: supplies, benefits, travel, equipment, contracted services, and other items you would expect to be within that budget. There are several things to consider related to an operational budget. And the first is, what do we need for daily operations in order to operate the court? What are the types of things that we have spent historically, and what do we need to ask for going forward? Are costs going up? Which costs are going up? How will you estimate what you're going to need? Are you going to look at trends from the past? Are you going to add in the effect of the economy? Are you going to do some kind of analysis? Are you going to take what you've spent in the past plus incremental items you know that you need? And so we need to ask those kinds of questions. Another thing to consider is equipment. Does equipment need to be refreshed? Are some things getting old? Are some things getting near the end of useful life cycle? And so we should include an analysis of our equipment. We should include maintenance. Some courts have maintenance within their budget, and sometimes the funding authority takes care of that maintenance. If you are responsible for budgeting for some maintenance items, raise your hand, please. All right, so a lot of you. And so those need to be considered. Is this the year that the carpet needs to be replaced? Is this the year that I need to repaint? And so that needs to be considered, because that's part of your operational budget. And then the inevitable. Sometimes budget cuts are required. And so you need to know in advance what you would do in a situation to where the funding authority is asking you to reduce the budget. How many of you have actually had to come up with and implement budget cuts? A lot of you. It's not a lot of fun, is it? What would you, we won't need the mic for this, just shout out the answer and I'll repeat it for the live feed. What would you say, what % of your budget is labor and benefits? About how much? 90+. Okay, so we got 90+%. Different answer? 80, 85, and so it's going to be at least 80 most likely. 80 to 90%. And so you can see if you have to have a sizable cut, it doesn't take long until those cuts are painful. The most important asset you have is not on the balance sheet, it's the people. And when it comes down to reducing a budget and it impacts the people, it can be a very painful thing to do. And you should know in advance, if I had to cut, where would I cut? And so that's what an operational budget is. And then a project budget. It is what it says it is. It's for a specific project. It might be for a specific grant. For example, a specialty court budget. How many of you have a budget for a specialty court? Very common still. And so that's the project budget. Or it could be for something that your court has going on. You've got a project, a renovation, a small renovation, or maybe you're setting up a courtroom for remote court. That could be a project budget too. And the project budget can be in the first year, a project budget, and then maybe once things are up and running, it might actually be rolled into the operational budget, right? And so that's what a project budget is. Can you name a project budget that you've had? Okay, a bench remodel? Okay, bench remodel, that would be a project budget. Maybe all the benches are getting remodeled also, yes. All right, a case management system replacement. Now, often the case management system replacement is not only a project budget, but it's going to be a capital budget because of the level of expenditure. And so a capital budget is used for a major renovation. It could be used for changing out an air conditioning system. It could be for a new case management system. It could be for retrofitting all the benches in a courtroom. And so a capital budget is usually substantial. It's something that costs a lot of money. It's something that is not just a few dollars, and it's something that's going to actually be put on the balance sheet because of the level of expenditure that is going to be incurred. What kind of capital budgets have you seen? Oh, 2 new courtrooms. Okay, very good. 2 new courtrooms. Somebody else, who got a hand way in the back. Okay, I heard replacing the servers. Servers can be expensive, and that could be a capital budget.
We're working on security upgrades.
Okay, security upgrades could be a project budget if you're just replacing one magnetometer, or if you've got cameras and x-ray machines and magnetometers and all of that, then that would be a capital budget. So you have 3 types. They're operational, project, and capital. Any questions about any of those before I turn it back over to Dawn?
Okay, so we know the types of budgets we have. How are we going to put it together? So these are just 3 approaches that you can use. Zero-based budgeting, you start at 0. There's nothing in the budget. You're figuring out what you need and you're adding to it. Program-based budgeting is somewhat of a hybrid, but what you can do is each department has to roll out a budget or provide you a budget. Then you also can use some of the justification for continuation. What are the stats? Was it a very successful year? It wasn't. Are you going to cut them this year and lower last year's budget as a result of that? Or are you going to increase this year's budget? So that can involve more departments, more programs, more directors, and there can be a feedback loop that goes with it so that you're discussing it throughout the year with your program managers, and you're sharing the expectations, but they're also understanding that there's a tie to the larger budget. The court's going to give up something to be able to provide that specialty court with additional services. And then you can have the continuation budget. Just take last year's, add in inflation or add in the cost increases, and then you can incrementally just raise it each year. You can probably do one of all of them. That's fine. You can go on. So these are just some tasks to be able to help you. But before you even start this, you need to just ask yourself, what's your responsibilities when it comes to the budget? Is there a fiscal person who's going to mostly be designing it? Are you the court manager for the pretrial area? What component are you going to be responsible for putting together? And then as you know that, go back and look at the goals. Go back and look at the vision and the mission and everything. Make sure that everything ties with that. Then get with the fiscal person if you're not the person. Usually you're given a budget calendar from the local municipality or whoever. They're going to tell you when you have to have your first budget justification in, your final, your amendments and everything. Develop that calendar and make it, because it's going to be a process throughout the year. It's not a one-time thing. So then you know your responsibilities, you know your deadlines, you know how to be able to set it up with your planning so you can ensure that all the tasks are completed. And then you're going to go back, you're going to make sure that you're on schedule, and you're going to go back to IT or whoever it needs to be. You need to be able to produce those reports because you've got to be able to walk into your budget hearing and say, I deserve this money. Here's the proof of why I deserve this money. And this is why I'm asking you. These are the costs that I'm going to save your entity as a result. And then go through. Do you see any landmines out there? Are there any issues that maybe you couldn't get that statistical report that you wanted? What are you going to do about that? Maybe you see that you need a new case manager. You know there's not a lot of money out there. What other ways can you handle this? Think about if you're able to do part-time, because there may be some negotiations you're going to have with the human resource section to find out what you can and you cannot do before you even put it in a budget. And then you're going to align everything for that problem solving. You're developing a plan, whether it be a project management tool, which you could use, or it's going to be just your simple little Excel spreadsheet and you're following your process. And then you need to go back to ensuring your requirements are met. How many in here have a Public Budget Act? You know? You do? Anybody can tell me what certain requirements they have? I know Louisiana knows. Okay. So you have to go back to all of those, whether it's going to be a legislative act that would have told you, it's going to be something from your legislative auditor, but there are requirements for your budget. When do you have to post? Where do you have to post, like the official journal? How often? If I deviate 5% or more in one category, when is it going to trigger an automatic budget adjustment? Where does that have to go? Do I have to have a public budget hearing for that? And then after, do I have to post in the newspaper all over again? And when can I formally adopt my budget? So start asking the questions where there's probably something your legislative auditor's office can be a huge resource for you. And don't be afraid of your auditor. They're actually your partner. They're there for you. They're not there to try to find something wrong with your system. They're there to help you set up the process. We've gone so far as to ask them, how would you like me to record this? I'll make it easier for you so that you understand it. But are any of you using any of the other approaches, the zero-based or the project? And any pros and cons that you found by using them? No. Does anybody pull in their groups together? So they're teams, and it's a team approach for budgeting, and it's not just one little section. Talk about that.
The way how we do our budget, or I do the budget, is I generally gets the information from all the entity. That's the department, and they have to give us the activity measures because that's part of how they validate. Does the court need this funding? And everybody just has to tell me what they do and give me the activities. So if it's, well, last year we thought we were only going to do 5 adoptions, but we did 10. So then you put that in, because the budget department wants you to write why you're going to have to get this, why you're getting an increase. And so generally everybody, I get input from each department.
Have you had any resistance to that?
No, because my boss makes sure that it's done. Because in the interim, after we get the budget, she actually has to go over there and sit with the administration if they're asking us, why are you getting $600,000 for we want to do a whole new project. And why is there a budget? So everything has to be justified. So you have to have good reason to give the justification for the increase.
A continuation.
So budgets don't just prepare themselves. You need a disciplined approach, as Don was telling you about. And budgets don't just fund themselves usually either. Just as to spend some items at home, you've got to have a paycheck or other revenue source coming in. With a court budget, in order to do the great things that you do, it takes revenue coming in. General revenue comes from the funding authority. It's revenue that they give you to balance your budget. Not all courts are self-supporting. If your court is self-supporting without receiving any funding from the funding authority, raise your hand. 0 hands. There are some municipal courts that allegedly are self-supporting, but it's a very rare thing, and therefore you need some money from the funding authority. And that transfer from the city, from the county, from the state is called general revenue. How many of you impose fines? Speeding tickets, parking violations. What's another fine that you impose? Anybody? Yell it out, I'll repeat it since it's a short answer. Ordinance violations. Okay, thank you for sharing that. And so fines are a source of revenue. So are filing fees. Civil cases have a filing fee associated with them, don't they? Family cases, probate cases, etc. And we use those revenues, or somebody uses those revenues. They may actually not even go to the court. They may go to the clerk if you are separate. But somebody uses those revenues to help fund their budget. And then user fees. What's a user fee that you implement? Probation. Okay, they pay by month. Is that how it works? Okay, so probation is a user fee. Maybe you charge a fee for mediation, right? And so those types of user fees we depend upon in order to fund our budget. And then grants. How many of you have one active grant right now at least? Is it a drug court grant? That's the most common, right? But there are other types of grants. They may be large, they may be small. One time I had a tiny little grant from the Bar Association in Florida, and the grant was to determine the best way of providing assistive listening capability and to outfit one courtroom. And so that was a grant. And there are different types of grants that are available to you. And so these are typical court revenue sources. Do you have one that is not up there that you can share with us? Way up here.
Some of our specialized dockets are also supported through some level of subsidies through our like agreements through our county. So they're not really grants, and they're not something that we charge. But every year we get add-on board funding to support various components of some of our dockets.
Okay, very good. So revenue is important. You have to have revenue of some type in order to spend money, at least at the state court level, right? At the federal level, it's a little different. I'm not talking about federal courts, but just the federal level. But revenues are very important. Revenue projecting is an art. And the techniques we're going to talk about here can also be used for expenditures, but it's an art. It's not easy, but it is very important for us to project revenue. The economy has an impact on revenue. What happens to court costs related to shoplifting cases when the economy goes down? Does it increase or decrease? It increases. You have more of those types of cases, and there are more costs levied associated with that. What happens typically with child support revenue when the economy is better? It goes up because there's less unemployment and there's a greater ability to pay, and as long as there's a willingness also to pay, then that revenue goes up. So we need to look at the economy. How's it going? I know in Florida right now, which is heavily dependent on tourism, the revenue is coming in buckets. People are coming back. Tourists are traveling, and revenue is good, and it's because of the economy. And so the economy is one thing to look at when you're considering your revenues. Caseload analysis. What affects caseload numbers? Can you think of something that affects caseload numbers? I think I heard somebody in the back.
Law enforcement. Law enforcement.
Law enforcement, okay? Law enforcement has an impact on cases, also on revenue. I remember a time when the revenue associated with traffic tickets was way down. A piece of that revenue came to my county for technology reasons, so that was way down. And I remember being at a sheriff's meeting. All the chiefs from the municipalities were together, and this is what the sheriff said. Got a call from the county today. They're concerned about traffic ticket revenue being down. In the midst of a recession, how many of you are going to write more traffic tickets? Raise your hand. How many hands you think went up? None. And so law enforcement, in addition to arrests and other actions, just their practices, they determine, I'm not going to pile on. People are out of work. I'm not going to pile on with a little speeding ticket. And so they have an impact there. Trends. We should look at trends. What's this revenue or expenditure doing? What's it been doing over the last 3 or 4 years? What do we expect it to do? And looking out into the future, what do we expect the environment to be like? And therefore, we can use trends in order to project that revenue. Regression analysis is kind of a more sophisticated way of doing trend analysis. In regression analysis, the analyst would look at the deviations between years, and those deviations would be used to create the slope of a line. Anybody remember that from algebra? Slope of a line? Y equals mx plus b. Does that sound at all familiar? And so by looking at the deviations in those points, let me make myself a graph for a minute. This is the y-axis. This is the x-axis. Hold that in your mind. Here are the points. Boom, 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 boom. By looking at those deviations, a line that best fits those points can be calculated. And then that line can be used to forecast the next point and the next point. Does that make sense? That's what regression analysis is. True or false, Excel will do regression analysis for you.
True.
The answer is true. You put in the points, it'll generate the equation, it'll forecast the next point out into the future. So that's what regression analysis is. Any questions on revenue projecting? I know we had a question on forecasting. Any repeat question? Okay.
Okay, so now you need to do your needs assessment. What are you thinking about? Who in here even gets to make the decision for what the court wants in the future? Who makes the decision if you don't? The bench? What about the local municipality? Can they tell the court what they're gonna need and what they can expand on? In some areas that happens. So you kind of want to think, how's your area?
The locality does, because if they don't give us the money, then we can't get our improvements.
Right. What about the local legislature? Do they get to tell anyone? Yeah. And some jurisdictions? Yeah. So it's a game. It's of guessing to figure out what's going to happen. But if we're planning accordingly, like we've been talking about, then you can catch up. Because you're going to need to think about the courthouse improvements. I think we spoke about changing out the carpet. That's a huge endeavor. I mean, one little office, it's amazing how much it costs. Painting the building. then just a little scratch on the wall, just to try to get the sheetrock fixed. It could be. This new server, that's the roof leak. What else might happen? What about new judgeships? Do they ever get thrown on you where you've got a new judgeship, but then you got to worry about that desk and the cell phone and the extra computer? Is anybody dealing with that right now, a new judgeship? How's it going?
Well, I just found out our previous judge quit on the 30th of June, so it's a work in progress.
Did you have it budgeted? No. So then you're going back to the drawing board trying to figure out halfway through the year how you're going to catch up. What about a strategic plan? How many courts in here have a strategic plan? Okay, a few, yeah. What about the en banc? Are they sitting, talking about their future needs and what they want? Are they expecting you to come up with it? How do you handle or figure out what the future's bringing?
I have a problem with judges trying to understand that when they want something, that it has to be justified, be budgeted, and they don't understand what we're trying to say, and they just want it. And so then there goes, if you have a good relationship with your stakeholder treasurer, so to speak, then you can kind of get things done. But if the judge comes in and puts their hand down, then there goes your relationship, and then there goes the whole project. So I don't think the judges understand this. And I know it's our job to make them understand, but that's a challenge.
One of the things I found, especially with my judges coming in from private practice, is, hey, I want bigger monitors. Hey, I want this. And one of the benefits, especially from an IT perspective, there's certain, suggestions that come from other organizations saying, oh, they must be or should be 31 and a half. So we kind of say, oh, we do this for everyone. So that's kind of helped to set some of those boundaries as far as purchasing from a judicial standpoint. But most of my judges, we've had a kind of a revolving door. We've been pretty lucky about their willingness to kind of understand, hey, I can spend up to this, or, especially office chairs, I'm maxed at $650 unless there's an ADA need and that kind of stuff. So once you explain it, they've been pretty receptive.
One of the things that has helped us is that as the administrator, I lead the bench in strategic planning, so we're all on the same page, and those expectations and the plan is set forth through the year. That's been really helpful for us.
Are there any courts here that have administrative policies that state how much an individual judge can spend without going before the rest of the bench?
What we do is, like, if a new judge is coming, well, the budget department set a fee or a fund for them. They all get the same amount. However, if we have new judges coming, I think this year it's $35,000. And if it wasn't in the budget, then they can have to wait for the next budget cycle. So that's what we do when we have new judges. We'll put that in for them.
Okay. All right. Yep. There was a little bit of a monkey wrench last month for me. A judge wanted all new chairs in the courtroom. Well, the new chairs she wanted in the courtroom were $22,000. There was no process. So that's when it made me realize quickly we needed some administrative policies, because it was pitting judges against judges. And by having those rules and those standards set out, or if the judge wants to exceed their travel, I didn't necessarily feel comfortable saying, no, you can't do it. We need to discuss it with, so by having those rules, it gave me so much more control to be able to say, oh, that's wonderful. Yes, Judge, we could do this in the future, but unfortunately we don't have it in the budget this year, but I will make it a priority to make sure that we have it in our furniture budget or whatever in the future years. It just gave me a way to not be the mean person that I get called all the time and saying, no, you can't do that. I was able to explain it and to give some process to it. So, and then the infrastructure improvements is what we talked about. How many of you have a maintenance chart and a calendar for your building? You do? Do you have everything like the carpet, the
mechanical, engineering, plumbing, electrical, everything. We have a campus of 6 facilities, 6 buildings that we maintain, so absolutely.
And then that can be helpful too if you have it and you know, okay, it's been 5 years since we've painted. We expect to paint at year 7 when I have to budget that. Okay, implementing a special program. With that, you've got to go look at all of the little requirements. This grant might not allow you to charge the life insurance for your employees. All of a sudden, that's got to go on the court's budget and not the special program budget. So pay attention to all those little certification statements and go to the training for that, or at least communicate with that program director and make sure they know. Make sure that they know that they have to get it within, they could be on different fiscal years. So it's going to mess up your budget. You're going to have to do half a year on this one and half a year on the other. So know the timing of everything. Also know when things have to go in, because you may not be able to budget something because you're not going to have the receipts and the documentation that's required at the close of that grant, and maybe something you're going to have to move to a better time. Okay, so these are your operating expenses. It's everything we talked about before. On here, I don't know, the contracts, if they're going up all the time. There are other ways you can renegotiate, you can try to coordinate with your state and do things, but it's always a moving target, at least for us, especially interpreters. There can be a huge increase. I had a 20% increase in interpreters from last year to this year. I'm over budget already. So those are the things that I wish I would have known a little bit more, but I don't know what's coming in my courthouse yet. I'm not sure. So it is the best judgment, but I can explain it. And I have my stats and my court cases to show why it needed to go up and the importance of it. Telephone, travel, all of those things. Some of this is going to go back to your policies too. What is allowed for staff? When can they travel? Is it the municipality that gets to make that decision? Do you judges need to have a discussion? Do you want to talk about on en banc? How important is it for our staff to continue to get training? If so, what's our plan? How are we going to structure this so that everybody's entitled to some education? Security, that's a huge one. Some courts have to budget it, sometimes the municipality budgets it. But what happens when you don't have the security? Sometimes the court all of a sudden has to hire that detail officer to be there. There are going to be some unknowns that hopefully you have enough wiggle room in there to be able to structure. What are you using to get the best way to get your estimates? Are you going off of your stats or are you going off of your previous budgets? What are you using? Mm-hmm.
So when I get ready to do the budget, I'll pull my report for spending for the year past. So I'm about 6 months in at that time, or 4 months in, whatever I'm at when I pull it. So I try to see what am I spending so far? Where do I need to change? Sometimes it's just GL codes that I'm saying I'm spending more here, and it's the same fund. I can kind of move some stuff around just so we're consistent. Other than that, we try to, when we're dealing with things like computer IT, updates, we try to do each department. So I know every year it's about 20,000. So that number doesn't change, but who we're servicing does. So we have some consistency in that.
Anybody seeing some real categories that are jumping up drastically right now? Maintenance contracts, utilities, interpreters, technology. Have y'all been successful in linking with any other courts and finding other ways to get those costs down? Just curious. See if there's any suggestions that others have. I know several states try to link courts together so that they're brokering the services to get a lower rate.
One thing we're experimenting with our interpreters is, and it's not just so much a cost reduction, but it's just a allocation of their time, is to try to contract part-time with a grant with a designated Spanish interpreter for our probation department. So they just have a set time that people can schedule with every day, because our court interpreters are running around the building like crazy. And we think it will reduce our costs ultimately for calling people in ad hoc. It'll kind of consolidate that time. So we're experimenting with that.
Don, I've seen courts link up together in the area of education. Education like this is vitally important. Sometimes the education is at your local court, and I've seen courts share the cost of bringing that education in, and therefore neither court has to have the expense of all the cost. In fact, if all the courts who attended chipped in, it would be even easier. You finished? I think I saw a hand somewhere. Did I see a hand?
We were negotiating a software contract directly with the supplier. Discovered they actually had a contract with the state, and the way it was worded with the state, it would apply to our municipality. We were able to get an even better price. So if we hadn't looked out essentially on those contract areas, we wouldn't have been aware that there was a lower price. So that was a good way.
Oh, that's very good, and I hadn't thought of those kinds of things until you mentioned it. I've even, one time our court linked up with the public school system in Miami in order to get the cost that they had for leasing copiers. You know, but they were larger and we were able to do that. So there are ways to team up together in order to save costs. To me, one of the most important things about this slide is that it makes me aware of how many things I have to remember in order to prepare a budget. You do not want to forget one of these line items. Look at the top one. What if you had a vacant position and you forgot to rebudget it? Think about the impact of that. And so there are a lot of things to consider when you're putting together a budget. Be diligent, triple check, have a list. Make sure all the boxes are checked before you submit that budget. Do you have anything you want to say? Okay. There's a hand way in the back.
The one thing I noticed that was missing is contingency for, say, high-profile cases that all of a sudden you didn't budget for, but start adding things like additional security. Maybe you have to set up a media room, something of that nature, bring people in extra hours going forward.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for bringing that up. That can be expensive, right? And it's unexpected. How many of you know which high-profile trials you're going to have in the next 2 years? You may be aware of something that's in the hopper already, but you don't know of everything that might crop up, and therefore it can be unexpected. There comes a time when you have to defend the budget. How many of you have been personally involved in the team that defended your budget in front of the funding authority? We have a few. That is an important proposition. It's something that you want to be prepared for and you don't want to fail at. And there's no, please strike that from the record in the budget presentation. There's no, could we start over? No, and often it's on even TV. The cameras are rolling, you're in the hot seat, and you've got to defend the budget. And defending the budget starts a long time before the time you sit down at the table in order to formally present your budget. And I want to talk to you about 7 things that you should consider in defending your budget. The first is informal contact. And by that, I mean it's very advantageous to try to get to know the staff of the funding authority, and if you can, also the elected officials, right? Because it's a lot easier to ask for money from a friend than it is from a distant relationship or from an enemy. And so informal contact is important. What do I mean by that? An email every now and then to let them know what you're doing with the funding that they gave you. Coffee before work. I used to regularly have coffee before work with the county manager, and it was very fruitful for me to do that, right? Maybe an invitation to the courthouse on a busy day. Emphasis on busy. If you invite them when there's nothing going on in any courtroom, that it would be better that you didn't give the invitation. But that's what I mean by informal contact, and it's very important. The next thing is before you submit the budget even, but certainly before you defend your budget, you should have an internal review. Your court should look at your budget. You should have a dog and pony show where you go through the slides or whatever you're going to present. You should look for accuracy. You should look to see if it makes sense. You should look to see if everything is included. You should look for a whole lot of things, and that internal review will catch some things. You should look to see if your justifications for your requests make sense and if they're compelling. I remember one year we were going to ask for some positions who would assist the public within the courthouse. And we first wrote the justification based upon the benefits to the constituents, based on the benefits to the funding authorities, constituents, and we thought, yeah, that looks pretty good. But when we did the internal review and we went through it, it just didn't ring a bell. It didn't sound good. It didn't sound compelling enough. And so we changed it. And how we changed it is that these positions, by helping the public in the courthouse, we're going to free up the time of judicial assistants, the judge's personal judicial assistants, so that they could better manage the incarcerated population to get them to trial faster. And so when we calculated the cost that would be saved in time at the jail, expenses at the jail, it far exceeded the cost of those positions. And when we went and presented it while we were defending our budget, the 5 commissioners all said, that's a no-brainer. Now, there's one thing that we had to do before the presentation, because the jail budget is not our budget, is it? Whose budget is that? The sheriff. And which of us carries a gun more often? And so we went to the sheriff to let him know what we were going to say so that he would be prepared to say, you heard from Mr. Van Bever about the savings. I've already incorporated the savings into my budget request. So we're appreciative of what you've now approved, and we anticipated that, and we have incorporated that into our budget. And so an internal review is very important. You should look at your budget document. It should be professional. I think it should have some color if possible, but you don't want to make it look too expensive. You don't want it wire bound with 24 karat gold wire and every page laminated. Why don't you want to do that? It looks like you're a court who wastes money, right? And so you don't want to make it too expensive looking, but you do want it to be clear and concise and have a little bit of color to draw their eye. Maybe an executive summary if they allow you to submit one. But consider your budget document before you go to defend your budget. Thirdly, your support materials. Have those ready. Often support materials are not required by the funding authority, but they're extremely important, especially for answering questions. I always had someone who knew where we were in the presentation, would have those support materials ready, and would be prepared to answer questions. Because it's impressive when they say, Mr. Van Bever, I see that you have a line item for computer purchases. Could you tell me how many? And that person can say, well, there are 15. And by the way, the average age of the ones being replaced is 8 years. This is the brand. Here's the cost per. That's a lot better than saying I don't know, or lying, guessing. And so the support materials are very important. They should be with you at the budget presentation. They should be very organized. There should be someone who's familiar with what information is where, and so questions can be answered very quickly. Then there's the presentation team. Who's going to be on it? What role will the presiding judge play? Will the presiding judge give the entire presentation? Will the presiding judge say, it's great to be here with you today. Thank you for your funding in the past. And now Dawn is going to present the budget. Or will the presiding judge just be there just for moral support and appearance? You need to decide that, and that can differ based upon who the presiding judge is at the time. What's the role of the court executive? What's the role of staff? You don't want to have people looking at each other and pointing to each other, wondering who's going to answer. All those things need to be worked out before you defend your budget. Number 6, know the funding authority. What's going on in the minds of the funding authority? They have numerous interests to fund other than yours, don't they? Sometimes they don't really even care about the court. You're just on the agenda and they got to look at your budget. They have other things to think about. They want clarity. They want simplicity. They are intolerant of disorganization and unprepared presenters. And very importantly, they despise power plays and threats. I remember a time an elected official came into the budget presentation with a huge stack of paper. It was at least 10 inches thick. Came to the podium, dropped the paper. This is a lawsuit. I've been asking you people for more space for a long time. If you don't give it to me today, I'm going to file this lawsuit. It's ready to go. Believe me, I'm willing to do it. I'm going to do it. The chairman of the county commissioner was 4'10". She came up out of her chair and off her feet, I think. And she said, Mr. Elected Official, have you forgotten who holds the purse strings in this room? Do you really think you can threaten me into giving you what you want? I suggest, sir, that you sit down and shut up. No power plays. Set it in your mind. If you have to, school your judges before you get into the budget defending room, that we're not going to do that.
Okay, so your budget justification, we talked a little bit about that. Here's your main question. Why does the court need the money? Why do you need it? What's your purpose? What are you going to do? And then here's another big one. What are the consequences if you don't get it? So you need to be able to prove all of this. It would be stats. It was going to be your statistical reports, obviously, and things like that. You don't get the money. What does it mean? Are you not handling certain truancy cases? Are you cutting down the number of schools that you're going to serve? Tell them. Spread it out. Spell it out for them. Show them exactly what the consequence would be. They don't understand the courts for the most part. They have no idea what the courts do. So walking in and saying we had this many filings in a year doesn't make any sense. Walk in and say child support collections went up 22% as a result of our court services. The reduction in delinquency cases has had a significant reduction to the sheriff's office and things like that. And you work with your counterparts to be able to explain that. But what's important to your judges and what's important to your jurisdiction needs to be determined. What matters to the district attorney? What matters to that sheriff? What matters to your neighbor down the street? Those are the things that you want to be able to spell out, because in the room is going to be a bunch of politicians, usually for your budget hearing, and everyone has a different agenda and everyone has a different need. But anything that they can bring back to their constituencies, saying that this is the support of the court system and the difference that it made, makes an important stand for us all. So have your statement of need. A budget justification needs to be brief. You're going to have like every category and make it brief, but have your supporting documents that you can pull out, because they're not going to give you a whole lot of room to write everything. Be effective and efficient with your processes and prove it. We move cases through. We don't have so many continuances, things like that. Summarize everything. It's just a global overview, but that's probably what they're going to read, except for the fiscal people who get into real detail. But those politicians that are going to be in the room asking you the questions, they're reading that summary. So make sure it's understandable for somebody who doesn't know anything about the court system. And then, as we talked about, consider it right now. They cut your budget 50%, 15%, whatever it is. What's the consequence to your organization? What are you not going to be able to do that's a valuable item for your jurisdiction?
There are three major strategies, or three summary strategies for reducing a budget if you have to. The first one is reduce. That means just to trim a little bit here and there, a little nick and tuck. Maybe everybody cuts 0.5%. The idea is that it's temporary and you'll go back to normality pretty soon. Maybe even, best case, the budget is not actually cut. You're just asked not to spend all of it. And that way you don't have to ask for the money again in a future year. Then there's the remake strategy, or rearrange the deck chairs. You see this is a cruise ship in the graphic. To move things around, to do things a little bit differently, to streamline business processes. Maybe you use digital court recording more and stenographers less to save money. Maybe you, instead of purchasing letterhead, you print it right off the word processor. Things like that would be a remake strategy. The intent is that the cost savings are permanent. It's even a good strategy during good times, isn't it? To consider how you might do things better. And then the remove is when the deck chairs go overboard, when things have to be taken out of the organization, when you no longer do that program, or you're only open Monday through Thursday, or you close a court facility, or something like that. And then Don is going to talk to you about some specific ways, things to consider when reducing the budget.
Okay, so hiring freeze, whatever it may be. You might be reducing your positions. Many states, municipalities, whatever, have certain personnel rules. So you're going to want to be aware, because you might not be able to cut what you thought you were going to cut because you have a bumping process. Some have unions to contend with. You're going to have to look at those special things to see if your reduction in personnel is going to even be allowed. But you can also reduce overtime. We don't have too much of that because we use comp time. But you can postpone equipment replacement. I was supposed to change every 3 years, I changed the desk computers for personnel. I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to roll it out to every 5 years now, or every 4 years. Reduce travel and training. Maybe we don't go out of town anymore. Maybe we're going to have to look for some things in-house. We can do a lunch and learn and do certain programs, but we're not going to be able to travel to the actual conference. Change the hours of the court. That may or not be in your wheelhouse. You might not be able to make those decisions, but that's another option that some courts have done. You can close a court facility. I had an annex building, had to close. You eliminate some sections, close them off. Outsourcing, IT, no longer in-house, you're going to hire a contractor to provide those services. You can stop providing a service, whether it be the ATM that's accepting payments, maybe it's too expensive. You're going to get rid of that. if your contract's going to allow it. That's something else you're going to have to look into, if the contracts are even eligible to cut. Or you can eliminate a program. Something's not working. I have to get rid of my juvenile drug court. It's just not functioning the level it needs to. So these are just some quick things, but there are tons of ways you can reduce, and everybody's going to be creative because every jurisdiction's a little bit different.
If you get into trouble mid-year in your budget, there are typically two different ways to address that. One is to increase revenues, and the other is to decrease expenditures. You see some questions under the revenue. Can you add additional court costs? Can you charge higher user fees? Can you go to the funding authority and explain and justify why you need some more money from them? Can you improve the collections? What was it we saw this week? $3 billion in uncollected court revenue. Can you increase your collections? And then on the expenditure side, what can you cut? Can you trim a little bit out of office supplies? As Don mentioned, can you delay some computer purchases until the next fiscal year? And then the last one that we never want to have to consider, must you lay off personnel because the cuts are so deep?
Okay, so we're going to wrap up and bring us back where we started from. If you are in this room, you have started the Core Champion program. Congratulate yourself. So now what you need to do, there are 13 competencies. There are 3 modules. You've got the vision, the principle, and the practice. The certificates that were handed out yesterday all be for, you can flip it, I'm sorry. So this is the goal of the Core Champion program that you can read. Thank you. But these are the certificates. So if you go back and you'll look into your app, you'll see the structured response, the SRT. You will complete that. The question that they're going to ask you, I already know what it is, I'll tell you, is name one of the ways that you will design your budget. What steps will you take to draft the budget, present the budget, and get the final approval? 4 sentences. That's all you need. You send that back in. It's going to have an email address at the bottom. Send it back in. You get credit. You will have completed one of the 13 competencies. So if you complete all of the principle, which is 2, you get a principal specialist. You complete the 3 vision, a vision specialist. You complete the 8 practice, you get that. After you finish all of them, the Core Champion requires just a paper. All of this can be found on the NACMcore.org. You'll be able to hand it in, and we'd love to recognize you next summer, and you could be the first, because this session and these afternoons' public relations has never been offered. So you could never finish the Core Champion program until today. So you could be in the first graduates. But these are basically, the core is just what we think, and NACM has thought, and the members have thought over the years, are the competencies that a court manager needs to know. It's a taste. It's a way to help you. But you can go online, and even non-NACM members can go online for NACM or NACMcore.org, and you can see the old videos and things like that. You can go back, you can do all of your 13 competencies after today and complete them. There's also going to be more and more training for NACM that's coming out, so you're going to look forward to seeing some one-days where you're going to get in-depth. So if you have any questions, please find us, ask us. It's very easy. You're going to, Melinda's here. She is the court manager editor. That is our journal, if you're not aware. The last 2 sessions have had information about internal controls. Go back. That's another part of this curriculum we handled today, but we didn't get to. The other thing is you could publish. If your paper, you could publish into the court manager. So it's just other ways to develop your career and your expertise. So I look forward to working with each and every one of you. Please reach out, ask any of us. We are happy to answer any of those questions. And thank you for being here.